The invoice that broke my heart, the envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. At first, I almost tossed it aside with the rest of the mail. The return address belonged to my mother, and that usually meant one of two things: criticism disguised as advice or another reminder of how disappointed she was in me. I sighed and placed my coffee on the kitchen counter. For a moment, I considered leaving the envelope unopened. Life had been peaceful lately, and I wasn't eager to invite more negativity into it. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I slid a finger beneath the seal and pulled out a stack of papers. The first page looked strangely official. My stomach tightened as my eyes moved to the bold title printed across the top. *** cost of raising a failure ***. I blinked. Then I read it again. Surely I was misunderstanding something, but the longer I stared, the worse it became. The document was an itemized invoice. My mother had listed every expense she claimed to have spent on me from birth until I turned 18. Food, clothing, school supplies, medical bills, birthday presents, Christmas gifts, summer camps, even the cost of the bicycle I received when I was 10 years old. Every line had a dollar amount beside it. At first, I thought it was some bizarre joke. Then I reached the final page. At the bottom sat a grand total, $347,281. 43 ***. My hands began to shake. Attached to the invoice was a handwritten note in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. ***, since you never became someone worth being proud of, it's time you paid back what you owe. I felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. For several seconds, I simply stood there staring at the paper. A lifetime of memories flooded my mind. Every report card I had proudly brought home only to hear, "Why isn't it better?" Every soccer game she skipped because Daniel had piano lessons. Every birthday where my accomplishments were compared to someone else's. Every family gathering where I was reminded that my younger brother was destined for greatness while I was merely getting by. Yet somehow, despite everything, I had spent years hoping she would eventually see me differently. Apparently, she never had. I dropped into a chair and read the invoice again. The cruelty wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the message behind them. My mother hadn't viewed raising me as an act of love. She viewed it as a financial investment that failed to produce the return she expected. The thought hurt more than I could describe. I was 32 years old. I worked 12-hour shifts as a nurse. I owned a small apartment. I paid my bills on time. I volunteered twice a month at a local shelter. No, I wasn't wealthy. I wasn't famous, but I had built an honest life. Yet to my mother, I was still a failure. My phone buzzed. A text message appeared from my cousin Melissa. "Hey, are you okay?" Confused. I called her immediately. She answered after the first ring. "Emma," she said carefully, "I didn't know if you knew." "Knew what?" There was a long pause. Then she sighed. "Your mom showed everyone the invoice at Aunt Carol's birthday party last weekend." My chest tightened. "What?" She passed copies around the table. I couldn't speak. Melissa continued softly. Some people laughed. A few thought she was joking. But she kept saying she was serious. Heat rushed to my face. The humiliation was overwhelming. My own mother hadn't been satisfied with mailing me the invoice. She had turned it into entertainment. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying every painful memory from childhood. Every criticism, every comparison, every moment I had desperately tried to earn her approval. Around midnight, I opened an old box of belongings that had once belonged to my late father. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed a distraction. As I sorted through dusty folders and photographs, something unusual caught my eye. A small locked file case sat at the bottom. Across the front, written in my father's handwriting, were 3 simple words, *** for Emma only. ***. I stared at it. A strange feeling settled over me. For the first time since receiving the invoice, I felt something other than pain. I felt curiosity, because whatever was inside that box, my father had wanted me to find it. And deep down, I sensed it contained answers my mother never wanted me to have. The truth my mother buried the locked file case sat on my dining table for nearly an hour before I finally gathered the courage to open it. I couldn't stop staring at the words written in my father's familiar handwriting. Asterisk asterisk for Emma only. Asterisk asterisk my father had been gone for almost 7 years, but seeing those 3 words felt like hearing his voice again. Growing up, he had always been my safe place. Whenever my mother criticized me or compared me to Daniel, Dad would quietly remind me that my worth wasn't measured by trophies, grades, or money. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, he often said. At the time, I never fully understood why he repeated those words so often. Now I was beginning to wonder. Using a small key hidden inside one of Dad's old desk drawers, I unlocked the case. Inside were several folders, bank statements, photographs, and 3 leather-bound journals. The first thing I noticed was a sealed envelope with my name written across the front. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was dated 8 months before my father's death. Asterisk Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to protect you. There are things you deserve to know, things I should have told you years ago. Asterisk, my heartbeat quickened. I continued reading. Asterisk, you've spent most of your life believing you weren't enough. If that happened, I failed you. The truth is that you were always enough. The problem was never you. Asterisk, tears blurred my vision. Dad's words felt painfully personal, as though he had somehow known exactly what I would be feeling when I read them. Then I reached the next page. That's when everything changed. Attached to the letter was documentation for a trust fund. The account had been established when I was 9 years old. The beneficiary was listed as me. The amount shocked me. Nearly $200,000 had been placed into the fund over several years. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. I had never heard of this account. Never. According to the documents, the money was intended to help me buy a home, continue my education, or start a business someday. But something didn't make sense. The final account statement showed a balance of 0. The entire fund had been emptied. I quickly searched through the remaining paperwork. Page after page revealed a trail of withdrawals. The signatures authorizing those transactions belonged to one person, my mother. I felt sick. At first, I tried convincing myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe there had been medical bills, maybe an emergency, maybe Dad had approved it before he passed away. But the records told a very different story. The money hadn't gone toward family necessities. Instead, it funded luxury purchases. A sports car purchased for Daniel after high school, private university tuition, business investments, expensive vacations, even a failed restaurant venture my brother had started and abandoned within a year. Each transaction was documented, each dollar traced back to money intended for me. I sat frozen. Suddenly, memories I had ignored for years began fitting together. The day Mom told me there wasn't enough money to help with nursing school tuition. The time she said the family couldn't afford a down payment when I wanted to buy a home. The countless occasions when Daniel somehow received financial support while I was told to figure things out. The money had existed all along. She had simply decided I didn't deserve it. With shaking hands, I opened the first journal. Dad's entries stretched back nearly 15 years. One passage immediately caught my attention. Asterisk, another argument tonight. She insists Daniel has greater potential. I told her both children deserve equal support. She disagrees. Emma notices more than she lets on. Asterisk, my chest tightened. I turned another page. Asterisk, I worry constantly about what this favoritism is doing to Emma. She keeps trying harder, hoping to earn affection that should be given freely. Asterisk, the words felt like a knife to the heart. For years I had blamed myself. I thought if I worked harder, achieved more, or became more successful, my mother would finally love me the way she loved Daniel. But Dad had seen the truth long ago. Nothing I did would have changed her mind. The problem was never my accomplishments. The problem was her choice. As I continued sorting through the documents, a photograph slipped from one of the folders and landed on the floor. I picked it up. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but after studying it for several seconds, I noticed something hidden in the background. Something incredibly important. A slow smile appeared on my face. For the first time since receiving the invoice, I wasn't thinking about the pain my mother had caused. I was thinking about the truth, and soon everyone else would know it too. The family reunion for the next 3 weeks, I said nothing. Not to my mother, not to Daniel, not even to most of my relatives. I went to work, finished my shifts, and carried on with my routine as if nothing had changed. Meanwhile, every evening, I carefully organized the documents my father had left behind, the trust fund records, the bank statements, the journal entries, the letters, and, most importantly, the photograph. The more I studied everything, the more impossible it became to deny the truth. My mother hadn't simply favored Daniel. She had deliberately stolen opportunities from me and handed them to him. For years, I had been told that life was unfair because I wasn't talented enough, ambitious enough, or successful enough. Now I knew better. One Friday afternoon, a group text message appeared on my phone. It was from my aunt. She announced a large family reunion scheduled for the following weekend. Nearly every relative would attend. A few seconds later, another message arrived from my mother. Asterisk, I expect everyone to be there. Asterisk, I stared at the screen. Normally, I would have declined. After receiving the invoice, the idea of spending time with my family felt unbearable. But this time was different. This time, I had something they needed to see. The day of the reunion arrived with bright sunshine and clear skies. My aunt's backyard was already crowded when I arrived. Children ran across the grass. Music played softly through outdoor speakers. Relatives chatted around folding tables covered with food. As soon as I stepped through the gate, several conversations abruptly stopped. People looked at me, then looked away. I knew exactly why. The invoice. My mother had made sure everyone knew about it. I took a deep breath and continued walking. Under one arm, I carried a simple framed photograph, nothing else. No folders, no boxes, no dramatic presentation, just the photo. My mother spotted me almost immediately. She sat near the center table, surrounded by relatives who had spent years treating her opinions as fact. A confident smile appeared on her face. Emma, she called loudly enough for everyone to hear. I'm glad you decided to come. I nodded politely. Several people watched us closely. My mother gestured toward an empty chair. Have you thought about the invoice? A few relatives chuckled. The familiar humiliation returned for a brief moment. Then I remembered the photograph in my hands. The evidence, the truth, and suddenly I wasn't nervous anymore. I replied calmly. My mother smiled. Good, responsibility is important. More laughter, then she glanced at the frame I was carrying. What's that? I walked to the center table. The conversations around us gradually faded. Everyone seemed to sense something unusual was happening. Without saying a word, I placed the framed photograph upright where everyone could see it. My mother's smile disappeared. At first, nobody understood what they were looking at. The picture showed my father standing beside a bank manager many years earlier. Both men were smiling. Dad held several documents in his hands. Attached beneath the photograph were copies of those same documents. The trust fund agreement, the beneficiary page, my name, the original balance. The crowd grew quiet. My aunt leaned forward. What is this? I answered calmly. A trust fund my father created for me. Several relatives exchanged confused glances. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I continued. The fund contained nearly $200,000. A shocked murmur spread through the gathering. My cousin Melissa stepped closer to examine the paperwork. Then her eyes widened. Wait, she whispered. I reached into my bag and placed additional copies of bank records on the table. The withdrawal history. The authorization forms, the signatures, every transaction, every dollar, every piece of evidence. The silence became deafening. One by one, relatives began reading. Faces changed. Expressions hardened. Questions emerged. Then someone asked the question I had waited years to hear. Where did the money go? Nobody answered. My mother stared at the documents. Daniel looked completely confused. Finally, my uncle pointed at the records. His voice was barely above a whisper. The withdrawals were authorized by your mother. Gasps erupted around the table. For the first time in my life, the spotlight shifted away from me and landed exactly where it belonged. On the person who had spent decades controlling the story, the person who never imagined the truth would finally catch up to her. And the worst part for her, I wasn't finished yet. The photo that changed everything, the silence hanging over the reunion, felt heavier than any argument could have. For years, my mother had controlled every family narrative. She decided who was successful, who was disappointing, who deserved praise, and who deserved criticism. Most relatives never questioned her version of events. Now they were staring at documents that told a very different story. My mother was the first to speak. "Those papers don't prove anything," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, but I noticed something I had never seen before. Fear. The confidence she had displayed moments earlier was gone. My uncle frowned as he reviewed another page. "The signatures match yours." My mother crossed her arms. "I managed family finances. That doesn't mean I stole anything." Daniel looked back and forth between us. "What exactly is happening?" he asked. I reached into my bag one final time and removed copies of my father's journal entries. "I think Dad explains it better than I can." Several relatives began reading. The gathering became so quiet that the sound of pages turning seemed unusually loud. My aunt covered her mouth. Melissa shook her head in disbelief. One journal entry described my father's repeated attempts to stop the trust fund withdrawals. Another documented arguments between my parents regarding favoritism. The final entry was the hardest to read. Asterisk, if Emma ever discovers what happened, I hope she knows I tried. She deserved better than this. Asterisk, tears filled my eyes. Even after all these years, my father was still protecting me. Across the table, my mother's face turned pale. Daniel slowly lowered the journal pages. "You used Emma's trust fund?" he asked. She didn't answer. "Mom," he said again, his voice stronger this time, "did you?" Her silence was all the answer anyone needed. The realization hit him like a truck. The sports car he had received, the tuition assistance, the money for his restaurant venture. The luxury vacations, much of it had been paid for with funds intended for me. For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely ashamed. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I know," I replied, and surprisingly I meant it. The real betrayal had never been Daniel. It had always been the person who encouraged the division between us. My mother suddenly stood up. "This is ridiculous," she said. "After everything I've done for this family, you're all attacking me." Nobody responded. She had spent years demanding sympathy and loyalty. Now the room was full of people seeing her actions clearly for the first time. A few minutes later, she grabbed her purse and left without another word. No one stopped her, no one followed. The woman who had mailed me $347,281 invoice walked away completely alone. The following weeks brought changes I never expected. Relatives who once believed her stories called to apologize. Some admitted they had unfairly judged me for years. Others confessed they always suspected favoritism, but never realized how extreme it had been. The most surprising call came from Daniel. We met at a small coffee shop near my apartment. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me and said something I had waited my entire life to hear from someone in my family. "I'm sorry." Not an excuse, not a justification, just an apology. Over the next several months, we slowly rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. As for my mother, she called repeatedly. Voicemails, text messages. Emails, most demanded forgiveness without accepting responsibility. I ignored them all. Instead, I mailed her a single envelope. Inside was the same photograph from the reunion. The photo of Dad creating my trust fund. On the back, I wrote, college fund taken, $200,000, €0, lost growth over time, $415,000, €0, years spent believing I wasn't enough, priceless below that, I added one final sentence. This is the only bill that matters. I never received a response, but I didn't need one. Months later, with legal assistance, I recovered a portion of the stolen funds. I used the money to buy a home and establish a scholarship for nursing students in my father's memory. The greatest victory wasn't financial, it was emotional. The invoice that once made me feel worthless had accidentally exposed the truth. My mother wanted me to believe I was a failure. Instead, she gave me the opportunity to prove something else. That success isn't measured by someone else's approval, and that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living a happy life after the people who hurt you lose the power to define who you are.